Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Chief Outsiders Live. I'm Jim Vinoski. I'm your host. I am a contributor at Forbes for manufacturing, and I'm the host of the Manufacturing Talks web show and podcast. And I'm here with Bob Sherlock. He's the partner and CMO at Chief Outsiders. Hello, Bob.
Hello, Jim. Nice to be with you.
Good to see you again. For those of you who aren't aware, we did talk a month ago at our first live show. If you're interested in seeing that and catching up on what we talked about last time when we discussed dollars you could invite to stay to help fund your growth, that link is in the comments in the chat. So check that out, or go to Chief Outsiders on LinkedIn. You can find it there as well. So Bob, really excited for our discussion today because it's another version of the theme, right? Last time we talked about the money that you have in-house now and how you might fund growth with that. Now we're going to talk about money you don't currently have and how you can get it, right?
Exactly. And not from the capital markets, but rather from customers, the best source of funding
Important.
of all.
Yeah. Yep. And so, before we get to the nitty gritty on it, when we discussed what we were going to talk about, Bob referred me to one of his blog posts called Planes, Trains, Automobiles, and Downturns. And there's a really good collection of info in there. You should check that out as well on the Chief Outsider site. But what I really wanted to jump off with, first of all, is you used a scene from that iconic movie, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, to highlight what we're talking about here today. So tell us a little about that, Bob.
Well, for those of you that have seen the movie, you'll recognize it immediately. Let me set the stage for everybody else. So John Candy and Steve Martin, their characters are barreling down the highway at night, and they're going in the wrong direction on an interstate highway. And motorists who are going in the proper direction are trying to get their attention and tell them, hey, you're going the wrong way. And these two actors managed to not get the message, and instead we're kind of like, what do you mean going the wrong way? How would they know where we're going? And then they wind up narrowly avoiding death in a head-on collision because they are going the wrong way. So when it comes to the dollars that could be and should be coming in the door, one of the things that I think we'll chat about today is pricing as one of those things. Sometimes if you just question your own belief set about pricing and let other people help you, bring some fresh perspective to it, sometimes you can achieve a lot more than if you just stay stuck in your own assumptions, as John Candy and Steve Martin did in that scene.
Yeah, barreling along the freeway in the opposite lane, and people trying to help them out, and they're not paying attention. So yeah, sometimes it's what we don't know that can nearly kill us, right?
Exactly.
But then in your title, you had Planes, Trains, and Automobiles and Downturns. Now, obviously there's a lot of debate about where we're at economically, but I don't think anyone would debate that we're in some more challenging times now than in the recent past. Yeah. What are you hearing from manufacturers as far as what the impact is and how that leads us to the discussion today?
So I'm hearing a fair amount of caution, but I'm also hearing from a number of CEOs and other business leaders that, hey, we know we're supposed to be hitting a downturn, but we're not feeling it yet. Or maybe they're seeing some slowing and so on. But obviously everybody wants to be alert to it. And so that has them focusing, of course, on the cost side, which we talked about last month, the dollars that, they come in the door and let's invite them to stay a little bit longer. But it also has them looking at, hey, what can we be doing from the revenue side? Savvy CEOs know that even if we do head into a downturn, or even if they're already feeling it now, there are probably things within their control that can be, that they can be doing. They're going to bring some more dollars in and help offset cost inflation or anything that happens down, maybe build a little bit of a cushion, for the unforeseen down the road.
I hear a few really common themes from literally all over the world, and those are obviously inflation, the difficulty of getting and retaining the workforce people need, the skills they need, and then of course supply chain difficulties. And do people run the risk, even if they think they're being attentive to the overall business, of kind of getting tunnel vision because of those challenges that are hitting them every day?
Yeah, and it's really hard, with all of those challenges that they're grappling with. It's easy to see a week just slide by and not have been focused on
Hmm.
things that they could be doing, that really, in many cases, they're not major initiatives, but you just have to tend to them and not just put them off and procrastinate them indefinitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a that's something that they've just got to try and juggle and make enough time for.
Yeah. And so, that was kind of teeing up that you can lose attention on a piece of your business, and the one we're here to talk about today is growth and how you
Yeah,
fund that. And so, first of all, people getting back in the mindset that even when things are tough, you still want to be thinking about that. But now, last time we talked about money you might have available to fund growth, but people may find themselves in a situation where, geez, I don't currently have the wherewithal to go after opportunities I see. So
right.
tell us a little bit about, okay, how do you start thinking through ways to get after the money that you refer to, that can be out there, the dollars you can invite in.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that I want to begin with. One is that, and this is particularly true for manufacturers, which is a sector near and dear to both of us, Jim. Um,
Yep.
it's it's very easy to feel like, oh, especially in tough times, there's only so much business out there, or we're doing as well as we can.
Hmm.
But in fact, we're often not telling as strong a story, our companies aren't, as they could be. If you think about what the effect would be in your business if you got 2% more sales without changing the offering or anything else, simply because the sales force was equipped with a better story, the website tells a better story, et cetera. In a in without having to work that hard and without having it take forever, it's very possible to discover, a better story. And so, what I encourage companies to do is to lay out a spreadsheet and make a few columns and put in company A, company B, company C, and so on, and have somebody go to 5 or 6 competitor websites and your own website and see how each company is describing itself on the website. So, I did this, for some component manufacturers, precision components that go into farm equipment and auto and so on, and how they described themselves. These were pretty much family-run companies, and so they were all very proudly talking about we're a third generation, we're a fourth generation company, and so on.
Hmm.
Everybody else was saying the same thing. You'd go down and take a look at, hey, what are they saying in terms of the benefits of doing business with us? Tends to be very generic stuff, not particularly motivating for a customer, and doesn't really answer the question, why do business? And then you take another look and say, like, all right, let's look for the messages that sort of say, why buy from us and not from our competitors? There again, it tends to be very generic stuff. So I would encourage CEOs and commercial leaders to, do that exercise, see what everybody is saying, and then say, are we really conveying the value that we bring to our customers? Do we really understand it? And if we do
Right.
understand it, is our website, for instance, saying that? Are our sales presentations saying that? And I can almost guarantee that they're not optimal yet. And by making that kind of change, the existing sales team, if they're telling a better story, if the website is set up to tell a better story, and then have the right steps to encourage somebody to become a customer, that will make a difference in the top line, and it costs very, very little to do.
Right. I have a point and a question, and let me jump in now for the audience. If you have questions, we're looking to address those in the last few minutes of our discussion here. Just put them in the comments section, and we'll refer to that as we get down toward the last 10 minutes or so. We will answer your questions. So throw those out there, and we'll get to those before too long here. But my question for you, Bob, you referred to those family companies that have been around for generations. That's really one of my favorite stories to tell. But it's really interesting because you're right. People will throw out that they're this family company and the company's been in family hands for all these decades, which is a great story, right? But not necessarily the story that's going to sell you. But that very fact says you're doing something right. And so how do they, a company like that, how do they explore what it is that's, brought them that success?
So it's a great point, and being family owned, is a great part of the story, but it's not the lead. It's not compelling, and especially if you're competing against a bunch of other family companies, then it's sort of like, okay, that's nice, but it doesn't differentiate you a bit. So how do you find, for everything that you do for customers? One of the things that we know about manufacturers is whether they manufacture finished goods or whether they provide inputs to other manufacturers, they provide a lot of services. We can get very focused on the product, but there's all these services. So for instance, there's a company I worked with that they made backroom equipment for retailers. And so for the major retailers, each of the major retailers wanted something a little bit different. Generally, it was going to require some engineering and so on. And it actually was really, really valuable to the customers. But, this company I was working with, they took it for granted. When I was doing voice of the customer interviews, finding out what mattered, and I find out, hey, this looks like a big deal. So I come back and talk to the company and say, hey, I understand you're doing this. That sounds valuable. Oh, yeah, we just do that. Well, time out. You don't just do that. If you're doing it, that's got value. You need to get some credit for that. And by doing that, kind of forcing yourself for every benefit that you talk about, for any feature of your product or any aspect of doing business, I encourage companies, take a look at what does that mean for the customer? What kind of economic value does it create? Because sometimes it creates quite a bit. Some manufacturers that supply just-in-time components to an assembly line, there's a lot of value in the OEM not having to have as much inventory because they've got stuff that arrives when it's needed. Well, that's got financial value. And so make sure to understand that, make sure to talk about it and estimate it. And they can also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So that leads me to kind of the next thing I was thinking about is, as companies put together this, what differentiates them from their competitors, and you're looking for that 2%, say, that you mentioned that can help you then fund your growth. Are we focusing on existing customers and growing what we do with them? Are we focusing on drawing new customers, or is it a mix of both?
Well, it's often a mix, but I'm glad you raised the point because there is often an opportunity to earn more business from current customers. I think back to, I started my business career at GE, and GE, of course, is a big, diverse company, but even business by business, as much as we were working to communicate everything that we did, customers, even ones that we thought knew us really, really well, they would always be surprised. Oh, I didn't know you offered that. And so there's an element of that you just can't take that stuff for granted. And, you've got to reinforce it periodically in terms of like, hey, here's the offering, that we've got available for you. And here's the benefits and so on.
Excellent. There was another piece I wanted to explore from your blog post. And it's just, I think, a wonderful term that you came up with, daring caution. And so, we're talking about tougher economic times, and people might get a little bit more hesitant to risk their hard-earned dollars. And you refer to daring caution. Tell us about that concept.
So daring caution, I developed it. One of the things that I found is, both in my corporate career, with manufacturing companies and distribution and so on, and then helping companies as a service provider, I discovered there's a lot of fear when it comes to price, and particularly about, trying to raise prices. There's a lot of fear around it. And what I realized is that we need to acknowledge that fear. A degree of caution is very, very appropriate, but at the same time, you can completely immobilize yourself. You have to dare to get better, but the caution part says, let's do our homework and let's find the least risky place to do it. So what to apply daring caution, it's, at the leadership level is like, hey, we got to find some price. And every single company I've worked with, to some customers on some services or products in some geographies or some channel, we are never optimally priced. There's always an opportunity where we can find places where we're giving more value, or we have reason to believe that we're giving more value than we're actually charging. And by doing selective price increases, it can be very, very powerful. I mean, I also talk many times about the 1% change that can bring in millions, or even in a smaller company, sometimes hundreds of thousands. If you do, rather than across the board price increases, and obviously everybody has seen some cost inflation, probably has made some moves to try and recover some of that cost. But it's much better to be selective and to say, where do we have the least risk in making some moves and then taking them. So the daring caution is, we are going to get better. We're going to try something. The caution is, let's do our homework and figure out where is it most appropriate, and then not take price action where we just think like we really are at the edge, like we're pricing very competitively, we're getting paid for value, et cetera. Instead, find the places where there's an opportunity to do it with less risk.
Is there an element to that part that involves taking a look at your complete slate of offerings and maybe refocusing? But people talk all the time about those
Yeah.
low end things that don't bring them a lot of dollars in, don't make a lot of margin, but take a lot of their resources. And to me, it seems like these times might make you hesitant to risk anything, but it could also kind of prompt the readjustment that needs to happen.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Being customer responsive, so many of our manufacturers, customers are asking for this, a new product variation or something like that, and they offer it. But over time, you do have to take a look at, is every part of the product line earning its keep? There are some things that, maybe just one customer is buying it and it's not that different than anything else, but it's taking a tremendous amount of resources. We're having inventory on that product, that just doesn't turn as well. So yeah, I think periodic product line rationalization, in discussion with customers. I mean, if you have a big customer that buys 10 products and 9 of them, are nice, viable products, and one, is not that attractive, you might decide, what, because of the relationship overall, even though that one's not terribly efficient, we got to keep it. But even there, it might be, well, maybe we need to get a little bit more price on that one.
Yep. If you're just tuning in, I'm Jim Vinoski, and we've got Bob Sherlock here from Chief Outsiders, and we're talking about how to bring in dollars that you can use to fund your company's growth. So listen in. If you come up with questions, pop them in the comments section. We'll get to those right at the end of the show. But continuing on, Bob, so let's dive a little more into what are the nuts and bolts of that exercise of looking at your competitors and their offerings. I mean, to me, it's easy to look at the broad overview, but how do you really get to those things that are going to set you apart from them? Are there special things that people ought to be looking at?
Yeah, and in addition, anybody listening will know how to do kind of product comparisons, but I would encourage you, think about the services too. And we touched on this a little bit earlier. So many manufacturers are wrapping services around, whether it's assistance in design or solving an engineering problem, for a particular application. Those services can be valuable. The tendency is among the manufacturers I've seen is to underestimate how valuable those are, and also to underestimate how much resources it takes to actually deliver those things. And the retailer backroom example I mentioned before, there was a major customer for this company that is rather famous, and its name begins with W, that really required all kinds of special engineering and so on. And when we took a look at what was required, it was about $750,000 a year in engineering, and there wasn't near enough thought to, well, there was no limitation on how much engineering. It was like, hey, we've got this big important customer, therefore we'll do whatever they want. And what they realized is, no, it would be reasonable to say, hey, a big important account, we're going to spend $250,000 a year on engineering, but anything past that, we need to charge for it. Or so, examples like that where you have, you could even do a menu of services and say, all right, which ones are valuable enough and specific enough to a customer that, we might say, hey, we'll give you so much of that, just baked in as a part of doing business, no extra charge. But if you require more engineering time, testing, special documentation, these are things that a lot of manufacturers, whether it's a finished goods or inputs, have to do for their customers. So I would say take a look at that, because there's some revenue opportunity. And even if you decide not to charge extra for these services, you make sure to understand the value of those things and put it in your communication, the sales communication and marketing communication, so that, again, we get credit for it. And it helps to increase share of wallet with the existing customers. And then, with new prospective customers, it's more attractive to talk about, hey, here's how we're going to make you money. Here's how we're going to help you be more productive. Here's how we're going to take hassles out of your life. That's a really, really powerful story that, again, we say, can we increase sales by 2% just by telling a better story? Yeah, it's actually kind of conservative, deliberately.
So that prompts another question in my head. You're talking about essentially services that are attached to your product that you may not be charging for or charging appropriately for.
Right.
Now, manufacturers, by their nature, like to make stuff and see that tangible product in the end. But isn't that also an opportunity potentially for people who aren't buying your hardware, but might buy that service separately?
Yeah, that's a great point. I definitely can see that. If you think of there may be the product line, but the service lines could be a significant part of the offering. If you've got the resources to do it, it could be uncoupled from the products per se. And so it's worth sort of saying, like, let's unbundle our whole offering, products and services, and then figure out what stays a la carte and what do we want in bundles, and then have a menu of pricing that goes with those things. It's a really, really good exercise, and every time I've seen companies do it, they've found opportunities to have more dollars come in the door, directly through charging for something, or getting a bigger share of the customer's wallet because they did a better job of making their value quite visible to the customer.
Mm-hmm. And then talking about going through this exercise for yourself, is there also an element where you engaging with your customer to do the same thing with them could potentially drum up that sliver of business you're looking for?
What a great idea. Yeah, if I, as a manufacturer, let's say I'm running a manufacturing company and I've got a dialogue going with some of my customers and saying, like, hey, how are you trying to grow your customers' business? What can we do to help you make your customer better off, in other than, cutting the price or, or just some standard stuff. Maybe there's some things that we could do together that allow you to stand out against your competition in your customer's eyes. So yeah, it's a great point. The customer's customer is a great point of discussion, with our customers.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to give you a chance to throw out something that we haven't touched on. I mean, you had some great ideas before we got on here. What haven't we hit on that's important to you that folks ought to be thinking about?
Um, so one that I spend a lot more time in the last couple of years helping companies work on is finding opportunities to add bigger value. If we take the example of companies that make components that go into finished equipment or something. So maybe it's parts that go into an engine or whatever that might be. Contract manufacturing in the component manufacturing world, Jim, you know this, like the OEMs or the tier one suppliers will send the component suppliers a print and say, hey, build me this, it's so-called build to print. Well, they can send that out to a vast network of suppliers domestically and internationally and say, like, hey, we've done all the design, we've done all the engineering and everything else. Your job is to make me this and give it to me at the lowest possible piece price. That is a pretty tough competitive situation. To the extent that there's an opportunity to add bigger value, for instance, I've seen some component makers look at the assembly that their piece is going into and say, we are one of 5 pieces in the assembly. If we design a new assembly, like we could have a combination of things as opposed to, like we could machine a single piece that incorporates 5 different pieces into it. And we can take that out to the manufacturers, to the OEMs or the tier one manufacturers and say, hey, look, we've redesigned this assembly. It's proprietary. You can buy it from us. That is a much higher value. And, if they've done a good job with it, then the OEMs are like, oh my gosh, we don't have to go through all of that. We can eliminate the labor of putting 5 pieces together. That's a high value thing. Even bigger value would be, not only are we going to supply all of those parts and pieces, but we'll do a vendor managed inventory for that stuff. So looking for opportunities to solve bigger problems for the customer, that is a great way to bring more dollars in the door. And in addition to, sort of gaining share on that direct piece of business, it tends to cement the relationship with the customer and gets more invitations like, hey, could you take a look at doing that on another, assembly that you're not contributing to? So, so looking for bigger value is really powerful. Looking for hidden value, what I talked about before, where you're doing something that's valuable, but you're just taking it for granted, making that more visible and looking for opportunities to add bigger value. Great ways to bring more dollars in the door without a lot of incremental cost to do it. So a lot of that incremental revenue is going to drop right to the bottom line.
So that talk of value and helping your customer out prompted another thought in my head, going back to your earlier comments about pricing. We talked about going up on pricing, which can be difficult, especially in tough economic times when people are facing increases across the board. What about going down on pricing?
There's 2 thoughts on going down on pricing. One is, well, maybe 3 thoughts. One is, obviously, if you're sensing that you are uncompetitive, that despite all of the value add you're trying to do, if you can see that, hey, we're just plain overpriced, then it can be very appropriate. Now, where possible, I'd like to see rather than just matching that, if we can offer a lower price and get something in return for it. So, okay, we're going to lower our price, but, instead of a 1-year contract, we'd like to get a 2-year contract, that type of thing. Another, of course, is on the cost and productivity side, which we talked about last month, Jim, along with Tim Van Meegem from the Pro Action Group. Companies are not near as productive as they assume they are. Tim's firm goes in and they regularly achieve, 20 and 30% productivity increases with the same people in the same facility through changes in process and layout and a variety of other things. So I would say that, if you do need to be going down on price, make sure you're getting as efficient as you can so that it's just not compressing your margin, because margin compression, you let that stuff go on for a while and it's not a bright future for the company.
Yep, makes sense. Um, I'm going to go back to planes, trains, and automobiles because there was another scene there. You remember where Dell was shopping out his shower curtain rings in the airport as earrings and
Earrings.
famous people's artifacts. What about that as a concept? Is it possible that you've got a product that's aimed at a certain segment that could be applicable elsewhere, an opportunity you're not even thinking of?
Yeah, it's a great example, Jim. That's right. I mean, where can are we missing some applications that are perfectly feasible? I've seen companies that were, again, they're producing inputs rather than finished goods, and they had done well in automotive and internal combustion automotive, and now they're saying, like, oh my gosh, the world is changing. It's not going to be probably as many piston powered cars anymore. We need to look at other markets. And it turns out that their capabilities are relevant in plumbing and heating and air conditioning, and and refrigeration, in aerospace and medical devices. And so they definitely need to take a look at where else could we take not just the product or technologies or some, but some fundamental capabilities. Where else can we take that game on the road? Because the chances are they might be bringing something really special to that new marketplace, and they can discover it with fresh eyes. So many of the companies that are competing in that marketplace might have blinders on, doing things the same way they've always done. And if somebody comes in with a fresh idea, well executed, it can win.
Yeah. Tied to that is tough economic time an opportunity if you're more in the commodities end of things to look at moving up market, perhaps going branded, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's right. Anything that you can do to create preference for your company over somebody else. If you're truly in a commodity, and again, I mean, unless there's something different you can do with the product, then you may say, okay, the product is a commodity, but how do we fit into the customer's business? And how do we make them more efficient, more productive, et cetera? A finished goods producer that's selling through, wholesale distribution like Grainger, or selling through, any of the big box retailers, et cetera. It's not just all about the product. Can we do anything for a retailer to increase sell-through at the point of sale? Like, could we redo our packaging? Could we advise them some? Anything like that? Is there something we can do with our logistics and supply program, that makes it easier for them to, like in big box retail, there's so many sort of like pre-packaged display units. It's all shipped in. You've seen these, end aisle type of things. All they have to do is basically cut the wrapping off of it, and bang, the whole thing is there, and the product is neatly stacked in, et cetera. Those are examples of, performing a function for the customer that, just helps them be more efficient, more productive, and faster, and give a better experience to their customers.
Excellent. A reminder, folks, if you have questions, throw them in the comments section and we'll address those here shortly. Here's a question for me, Bob. I know I've been I worked for many companies and been through tough economic times before, and sometimes we're our own worst enemies, just about getting started on something like this. So do you have
Yeah.
a few pointers just to get people out of the gates on going through this kind of exercise?
Yeah, so we'll start with the financial motivation, I guess. I touched on before the 1%. If you could get an average of 1% more price averaged across a whole bunch of selective moves, depending on where the company's financial position is now. If, for instance, the company's pre-tax operating income was 5%, holding, with holding everything else constant, a 1% improvement in price would yield a 17.5% improvement in operating income for a company with a 5%, pre-tax income. If a company had 10% pre-tax income, it's a 7.5% increase. So it can have a tremendous effect. So I would say, because that's there, or because you can readily compute what 2% more sales would mean in terms of revenue coming in the door, I would just say, take a look, especially for manufacturers, take a look at all of the services that you're taking for granted and figure out, are there some of these that we either need to get more credit for, they're in fact valuable to the customer, we need to articulate that value, we need to, with the customer, estimate that value and get the financial value of it recognized. And let's also take a look at whether some of the services that we're providing we can actually get paid for, in terms of charges, or charges above a certain minimum level of usage. Those would be a couple of great ways to get started. And then finally, taking a look at your story versus your competitor's story, get somebody unbiased to do it, whether it's somebody like us or somebody that can go look at the key competitors and your company and say, all right, how different is the story? Is your value really coming across? Start with that concrete step, and it will tell you, we actually have a much better story than everybody else. Or more often than not, it'd be like, oh no, none of us are that great. And that's the beginning of a change that, that again, brings some more dollars in the door.
Good deal. Okay. I'm not seeing any questions out there, and we're getting down, close to the end here. So, last thoughts, Bob. What else should people know as they grapple with bringing in that little bit of extra oomph to help fund their growth?
I think the biggest thing is just challenge yourself in the same way that, it's daring caution on pricing. You have to dare to get better. And then the caution part is, do the homework. We are, the business environment is not short of challenges. It may become more challenging as the year goes on, but dare to get better. And just, I would encourage people, there's more improvement potential there. You just have to believe in it, first of all, and be determined to go after it. If you need to get some independent help, some fresh outside perspective, that can also be, a really good thing to do it. But just be determined. We're going to find ways to make our value to the customer more obvious, get paid for it wherever we can, and, go after the right new kinds of customers. All of those things are doable. Once you make the decision, we're going to do it, and get started. Start with something small. If you need to, you can add something else next quarter and more on after that, but don't delay, get going.
Yeah, I would add, as a leader, it's incumbent on you not just to have those discussions with your teams about controlling costs and delivering on the day-to-day and, all the things that manufacturers think about day in, day out, but to constantly have that conversation about, how are we doing on growth? What are we doing to fund it? What do people have for ideas? Because that's another piece is, I don't know any manufacturer who doesn't have great ideas, him or herself. But you're not always the smartest guy in the room, right? So bring in other people and get their ideas as well.
It's a great
One
point.
last, Oh, go ahead, Bob.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's a great point. I mean, collectively, you and your team know so much of what you need to know, to generate some growth and to self-fund, for future growth investments, reinvestments in the business. So, tap into that knowledge.
Yeah. So one last opportunity for folks out there to throw questions up in the comments. We'll have a quick little chat here and take a look to see if anything pops up. And if not, we'll wrap it up. But so the one thing I wanted to share, Bob had the thing about planes, trains, and automobiles. And I have to admit, he had the date it was released, and that kind of hurt a little bit. That movie's been around a while, hasn't it, Bob?
Yeah, that's right. Maybe I shared a little too much detail there.
I'm not going to say the year. You can look it up for yourself if you're wondering. But yeah, that was a little painful thinking how
I
long
think
I've been
that's
watching that
good.
movie for Thanksgiving every year.
Touche.
Okay, no more questions. So any closing thoughts, Bob?
Well, thanks, Jim, for the opportunity to be together here. There's all kinds of dollars that can and should be coming in the door. I encourage all you manufacturers and services firms, be determined, take little steps and go get them.
And I would encourage you to check out Bob's blog. He's got some great stuff out there on the Chief Outsiders website. Definitely follow them on LinkedIn. Look for more of the shows. I'm sure this isn't the last one that Chief Outsiders will put out there. So yeah, thank you, Bob. I appreciate the opportunity to have a chat with you today.
Likewise. Thanks so much, Jim. Bye.